Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome to GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am one of their hosts. Name is Ethan. And I'm here to say that the running backs won today. That's it. Here we are. The running backs won. We've done it. Everybody clap it up. It's been a long time coming. But we finally did it. The running backs have gotten paid. And it feels good. And by the running backs, I mean one running back. Christian McCaffrey has found success at the bank account. He is the highest paid running back ever. And he's the most highest paid running back to the date of right now. So $16 million over 4 years, the most by any running back ever. And now we have to think, well, two things really. Is he worth the money? And two, who is going to get that type of money on their next upcoming deal? Because as we know, everything is about setting the precedent for the market precedent, the market setters. Who's going to do it? So here we go. This is the first segment of the day. Christian McCaffrey, $16 million, 4 years. That's a lot of money. Saquon, 4 years, $31 million. That's all guaranteed money for Saquon. He had a $20 million signing bonus and $7 million per year annually salaried guy, fully guaranteed money. At the time, this was a big time contract. Saquon is making a large sum of money, and he does not have to negotiate for a new deal until 2023. So he has some time before this has to occur. But you have to think ahead in times like this, because you can only imagine that Saquon is going to keep getting better, as his second year in the league was only last season. And we don't even know if he is in the prime of his career. So you can only use what you've seen on the field and stats to assume that he is going to tread upwards rather than downwards, especially after coming off a rookie season that was quite spectacular. And last season, the Giants were in quite a disarray when it came to the offensive end on multiple fronts, not just the running back situation. Their offensive line was banged up and kind of non-existent at the same time. And they have to address those things. They have to address whether or not their quarterback is the one to get it done. And they also had to look at the whole Eli situation and realize that this was not where we needed to be. And I think the Giants are going to try and trend upward from now on when it comes to building towards a better future for their franchise, even if that means that franchise is going to be building with Daniel Jones. So I think Saquon is probably going to make in the similar ballpark if I were to estimate, but we still don't know exactly how much I would project him to make. Personally, I think that what Christian McCaffrey is getting is for multiple reasons. One, literally was the offense last season. He was their best pass catcher. He was their best wide receiver. He was their best running back. He was their best a lot of things on offense. He definitely carried them for the better part of the season. And he was durable, and he was dependable, and it didn't seem like he slowed down, like he burned out by the end of the season. He looked like a guy who could have kept playing for another four games without looking like he missed a beat. So when you put that all inside the perspective lens, you have to think that the Panthers had to take care of Christian McCaffrey now, because if he proved this for another season, they would have had to pay him even more money. And at that certain point, you just don't have the luxury to mess around anymore. And it's better to get a deal like this done, where it's the potential that the market could shift towards a higher price tag later on down the line. So you don't have to be forking up so much money for a running back, and that way you can fill out other positions. It also helps that their quarterback, he's not on a super big time deal, but he's on a nice deal, which allows you to pay for guys, pay for skill positions, or pay your skill positions a good sum of money that necessarily does not mean it has to go elsewhere. It does not mean that you have to franchise tag. You don't have to waste a franchise tag on a running back. You can still pay him quality money and be able to keep everybody happy and keep the ecosystem going the way it needs to go. Let's look at another running back that potentially might have similar situation. So Alvin Kamara can potentially get a contract extension. I'm not sure if it's going to happen this season, or should I say this off season. It may still continue to be talked about if he gets extended or if he gets franchise tagged in the upcoming off season. But I, for one, believe that Alvin Kamara had a down year last year comparative to his first two, and it's for many reasons. One, Drew Brees was down, and that significantly changes the way that offense is supposed to operate. When Drew Brees goes down and you have Teddy Bridgewater, it is no longer a free-flowing offensive onslaught. You have to make Teddy as successful as he can be. So you have to build a system up for Teddy to succeed. And for Teddy to succeed, it was not a lot of Alvin Kamara out in the flat routes, out and running the route tree. It's a lot of him and Latavius Murray sharing the sugar and trying to keep the possession alive and keep the drive going and playing the long game rather than really, really stretching out defenses to the point to where you don't know where the ball is coming to. So instead of the Swiss Army knife that generally we see from someone like Alvin Kamara, it was more so a downgraded role, so to speak. And then when Drew came back, it wasn't like Alvin Kamara was 100% healthy, and the lack of a secondary wide receiver weapon outside, outside of someone like Ted Ginn was not where he needed to be. He's 35. Obviously, they had to let him go. They let him walk, and they got somebody in free agency in Emmanuel Sanders who should be able to replace that role and give Michael Thomas some help. And when you give Michael Thomas some help, then everybody's kind of stressed out on the other side of where the defense is at. And when the defense is stressed out, they have to cover so many different options. Jared Cook had a really, really nice end to his season while he struggled a bit in the beginning. So a healthy Kamara could really flourish in a system like this. But it does not mean he is going to be making the money that Christian McCaffrey is going to be making. I think he'll probably make a bit less, and I'm seeing more so. I would feel like the franchise tag might come on him quicker than somebody else would, but at the same time, a deal that's closer to, if I were to say which deal is closer to whose, I think that a deal that involves Christian McCaffrey's is a bit farther away for Alvin Kamara rather than a deal that is closer to, I would say, I don't know, maybe Melvin Gordon's deal is not the best, but it's still it's okay, it's decent. And his former running mate in Los Angeles now, the Chargers, essentially, I feel like his deal makes a lot more a lot more sense. There may be an Austin Eckler deal for him, potentially, and incentives. So maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Regardless, congratulations, Christian McCaffrey. The market has been changed. The precedent has been set. Saquon is licking the chops. Alvin Kamara is rubbing his hands. We have to just wait and see where the rest of the league is at and if they are prepared to start paying running backs this sort of money for their production and their archetype, because I believe Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Saquon fit in the similar archetype for what Christian McCaffrey just got paid for. And we'll just have to wait and see what exactly that's going to come into. All right. Well, we're going to take a break and we're going to talk about the Odell rumors.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Odell, oh dear, is what I meant to say. My tongue got a little tied there. But, oh dear, Odell is in the news again. And this time is for trade rumors that are essentially been confirmed false by many people. So, I don't know if they're really anything but smoke coming out of the camps here about Odell potential trade. But yesterday, by the time I'm recording this, there was a lot of flack going around Twitter and a lot of things going around Reddit about a potential Odell Beckham trade to the Vikings for a second-round pick and a fourth-rounder. And it was, like you would expect, a firestorm of news cycling in the underground version of Twitter. So the rumor mill of Twitter. And football Twitter was kind of in a weird place. They did not know what to believe. They did not know how this was going to affect anything else on the season. But we've already seen some pretty monster trades coming out of the wide receiver group already, a la Bill O'Brien and the Texans, and Bill O'Brien and the Texans again, getting Brandon Cooks. But it seems to me that the rumors were a bit far-fetched, and there's been no conversation of trading Odell, and there's also no conversation of Odell even being on the trading block. But that could be false later on down the line. You never know what these rumors, it could just be a smokescreen, and somebody might be just leaking something, and then something ends up happening. But so far, some of the big wigs in the NFL circles have denied these claims and have said that they have heard nothing of the sort. But let's just say they are putting him on the trade block. Why? Why would you do this? You just traded for him not too long ago for your first round pick, and maybe last year was a failure in your eyes. I would say Cleveland put a lot of personal pressure on themselves, and thus they did fail to their own personal pressure set upon them, but it was not a good season all in all, especially for Odell, who somehow still ended up with 1,000 yards, but it was not the best performance-wise of his career, and it was a lot of frustration and not a lot of overall team-building success. There's a lot of things to go around for that. Freddie Kitchens was the head coach, and it did not seem like everybody saw eye to eye with Freddie Kitchens in the offense, and we thought this would be something that would be fixed when our guy who was ahead of the Browns before Freddie Kitchens on, what was the show? Hard Knocks? Our favorite Hard Knocks character of all time. We thought that this would be over with. But in reality, it was just beginning for the Browns' head cases. And I'm not too sure exactly why a trade rumor for Odell would come up again. And it's not due to, it would only have to assume to do with his, maybe something inside the locker room, something inside the facility or just the franchise, that some people may not like Odell's attitude. Some people may not like the way he handles himself off the field, which I don't think he handles himself off the field in a particular way that's detrimental to the Browns, because it's not like he's holding them back from losing. Odell has been nothing but a quality starter for majority of his career, and it looks like to me Odell is just a passionate guy who wants to win, and sometimes emotions get high. We've seen this in wide receivers, we've seen this in players all the time, and of course these sort of conversations about if a player is a distraction, if he cares too much, if he's a diva, this, that, and the third all the time. So this isn't nothing new. This isn't a new mold. This just seems to be what ends up being displayed or talked about in media about certain players when they do act similar ways like Odell does. But does Odell produce on the field? I believe so. I believe that last year he could have had a better year, but there's just too many factors. For one, you got to remember there's just so many offensive potential on the Browns. And what we saw was a lot of Nick Chubb feeding, but inconsistent with the success of Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb was an amazing fantasy player, and if you owned him, 9 times out of 10, you definitely made playoffs, and you probably were in the running for the finals because Nick Chubb was doing it all. It didn't matter that Kareem Hunt came back because Nick Chubb was still the number one ball carrier, and he was getting the job done on his end. And then you look at the wide receivers group. They lost their number one tight end. They just got a new one in Austin Hooper to tag alongside. They had Jarvis Landry, who had a decent year, nothing to write home about. And here we are with Odell Beckham, who had a pretty pedestrian year to his standards, especially in the touchdown region. But this is something that has to be worked upon and built upon because Baker Mayfield was in his second year, and to be honest, I don't think he's had a head coach that has played to his in particular strengths as a player yet. He's not a guy who can really create stuff on his own, in my opinion, on the NFL level, even though we saw what was going on with Lincoln Riley way back. I think that's more of the fact that Lincoln Riley has a system for certain quarterbacks to really, really thrive in rather than the NFL standard of where a quarterback can really thrive in. And sometimes you can get away with making plays, making stuff happen with your legs in college way more than you can in the NFL. And we've seen that with many quarterbacks. In the NFL, you have to know how to make your reads and you have to know where to look down on the field and find your targets and find your wide receivers. And I think Odell, in particular, was very frustrated because he feels like he has been open in a lot of different scenarios. He's been not targeted enough, or he's not being seen out there properly. And it's affecting the team as far as winning. It's affecting him and his quarterback's relationship. And maybe it was scheme. Maybe it was a little bit of both. I'm a fan of believing that it's a little bit of everything. Maybe Odell is complaining a bit too much. Maybe Baker Mayfield isn't seeing the field as good as you can expect from a 2-year guy. Maybe Freddie Kitchens was not a great coach. A lot of these things could probably be happening at the same time. But it does not mean that it's time to blow it up after 1 year. If somebody's willing to blow it up that fast, then you probably shouldn't have been playing for that franchise anyway. And it was probably more of a desperation rather than an actual plan. And I think that's where I'm going to leave that on, is that I believe that if Odell really is on the trade market, even if it's underground trades and it was a leak and they were trying to snuff it out before things start to get really hectic, and there's even articles being written now or mock draft being written where Odell gets traded for a 4th rounder or something like that. If that's the plan, then you shouldn't have traded for Odell in the first place. You had enough going on as it was, and you just wasted. You gave up a 1st rounder, and you got a guy who clearly you guys don't want. At the end of the day, you thought you could handle what Odell brings to the table, good and bad, or good and questionable, and you can't. I don't blame you if that's the conclusion, but I just have a hard time believing that after a year of football, this is the way you're going to let him go after 1 year. This isn't like Odell's asking for more money. This isn't like Odell's looking for a new contract. This isn't like Odell is severely messing up off the field. This is just, I would have to assume you just think that he's just not your guy and you got to let him go. And if he's not your guy now, after what I would imagine, not much has really changed on his part. He was not healthy, and he still got you a little bit under 1,000 yards, if not 1,000 yards. What's the problem? And that's my issue. Like, what is the real problem in Cleveland? And I don't think we'll ever know. But we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back talking about some more wide receiver stuff with Bill O'Brien.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Bill O'Brien is telling us to cool it out. Cool it out. Cool it out. Let's see it play out more so. He's telling us to calm the brakes. He knows that the media has to get things out, but he's telling the fans to let's see it play out for sure. So Bill O'Brien spoke about the trade the second time he's been asked to address it since it was agreed to in March, shortly after the start of the free agency. And his main takeaway is the trade was worth the haul. So he claims that we are very, very good about being able to bring in the 40th pick, being able to get David Johnson. He says we are good about what we looked at the analytics, and based on the production that was leaving our team and the production that we were bringing in, that we were able to do it again. And it's very incomplete, and we have several roster moves left to make, including a draft and all other things that I've mentioned earlier. So we feel really good about the value that we got from said trade. And he says the best thing that he can tell the fans is please to wait it out. Just let's see everything play out and see what's happening. Of course, Bill O'Brien started as just the Texans head coach, and now he's the head coach and the general manager after Brian Gaine left last year, and he's taken full advantage of said moves and policies that are to his advantage as being the GM and head coach. So here we go. Bill O'Brien, let's play it out. So let's see what exactly, if everybody's blowing this trade out of proportion now, and a lot of things have happened since then to where maybe they had a plan all along, and we only saw the first step. And of course, our natural habit as human beings, especially nowadays, is to react to the first sign of anything that we deem as not good. And not even that, we don't know what the full shape of the Texans this coming season is going to be. Everybody was a little bit weirded out. Even their quarterback seemed a little bit weirded out. And nobody really knew what was going on. And a lot of people have been having it out for Bill O'Brien for a long time in the first place. So criticism in the public eye is not something Bill O'Brien is particularly new to. That he is not new to this sort of level of public criticism. Sometimes it's on the coaching end. This time it is on the GMing end. But is he wrong? Let's see it play out. So they got the 40th overall pick, and that's pretty decent. That's a nice second rounder, and you can find some quality starters in that round all the time. David Johnson. So when David Johnson was healthy, he was pretty good. He was getting 1,000 yards, well over 1,000 yards rushing, and he was getting at least 500 yards receiving every now and again. He was getting a lot of touchdowns. He was a fiend out there when healthy. But when not, he was very pedestrian, and you could really tell. And at times, he even was out for the season. So when healthy, and if we are getting a healthy David Johnson year, then that's nice. The Texans haven't had a quality starting running back since essentially Arian Foster. So this should be good for them, in my opinion. If it didn't mean giving up, of course, their best wide receiving threat that they've had since Andre Johnson was a good youthful man. But alas, another trade came about, and now we have to reevaluate the whole situation once again, because the Texans traded one of their second-round picks for Brandon Cooks, and Brandon Cooks had a weird year last year, but in all other years, he seemed to be able to rack in 1,000 yards, respectively, and albeit he is not the same wide receiver tier as DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think anybody expected Bill O'Brien to say that or believe that, but you have to believe that if everybody's healthy, some of their parts, this has to either be as equal to the production of, with a potential of being better than just having DeAndre Hopkins, and just having DeAndre Hopkins, I would assume, and having to pay him so much more money and not really be able to have any flexibility, any mobility. So the move to trade him was one of many to get flexibility. And what we didn't know was the Rams, who we'll talk about a little bit even more later, is they're also looking for a way of finding cap flexibility and draft capital at the same time. So the Texans found their perfect running mate for this sort of cap relief situation and figuring stuff out. And I would have to say, for right now, on paper, Bill O'Brien is not making as huge of a mistake, or has made as huge of a mistake as I would say most people believe at this moment in time. And after giving it some thought, I generally do think the Texans are not as in deep waters of uncertainty as a team as they once were. And I think that at the end of the day, we do have to wait and see it play out before we give our final judgment. Because we were set to put Bill O'Brien on the chopping block not even 2 weeks ago. And now after another trade and after what we're seeing from this draft and what potentially they could go get now, because before we were just assuming they're going to have to go draft a wide receiver. They may still need to draft a wide receiver, but now we have to reevaluate their situation a little bit more, because they got Brandon Cooks, a guy who still has a good level, top elite level speed, a guy who can get out there and stretch the defense. And helps run the system that Bill O'Brien and Deshaun Watson thrive in at the moment, which is air raid, attack downfield, speedsters all out wide, guys who can really go out there and stretch a defense and go get the football. That's been Brandon Cook's calling card his whole career. When he was with the Saints, stretched out the defense like no other. When he was with New England, he definitely stretched out the defense and forced you to really, really double him, or he demanded some attention. When he was with the Rams, the first year, it was really successful and it made some sense. When he was with the Rams the next year, it was a bit strange, albeit the Rams were strange last year in general, but to say he played 14 games out of 16 and only racked up 70 catches for 583 yards is a bit weird. I have to say, it's a bit strange to see that, but that does not, I don't think that is a identifier for him having a tread downward rest of his career. I don't know if he'll ever tread up to his career peak, which was probably with his last final year with the Saints, but there's just no way that you can't believe that he can get at least 800, at least 900 yards over the next few seasons. It's not like he's been injury prone. He gets out there and he plays the game. So it's very possible that they went out there instead and looked at this situation and said, okay, we may have a top 3 wide receiver in the league, but we have no draft capital. We have no financial flexibility. And if we continue on this path, we're not going to have any for some time. So if we're trying to make a push for something and be competitive and stay in the green for a longer amount of time, and we're going to have to pay Deshaun Watson relatively sooner rather than later, we need to make a move now. So that's what they've done, and we can only wait to see the results if this happens. This is very similar to me about the trade that happened with the Raiders not too long ago, and everybody clowned John Gruden, and now I don't think anybody's really clowning John Gruden much anymore about that in particular trade, because their team has been able to survive, look competitive enough, and with some time, they could be better off than the team that they traded Khalil Mack to. But we're going to take another break, and we're going to get into some DK Metcalf stock rising conversations coming up.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
DK Metcalf coming out of Ole Miss was a really interesting prospect, as when he was coming out, it was all about his physicals, his speed, his down the field quickness, his size at the position, his strength. But people wondered if he could really translate into a quality number 1 wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. And the Seahawks are excited by the wide receiver and what he's been able to do versatility wise. And here we go. So as the 32 teams navigate this unprecedented offseason, due to coronavirus, number one thing that they do know, as in the Seahawks, is that we can move him around and do different things with him. Seahawks offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer has said via NBC Sports Northwest, he's kind of got stuck at the X wide receiver last year. This year, we know we can move him around quite a bit more. There are so many more routes he can run. He's proven he can get behind people. And they think that the flexibility of moving him around and introducing to some kind of route concepts that we kind of got him, get him up to speed on, and now can complement his things was already put on film. It will be incredible advantage for us while we head into next season. So everybody knows Metcalf's big playability was on full display during the wild card game versus Philadelphia, but it doesn't take all that much combing through the other games in 2019 to see how much Metcalf could help in other areas. His blend of size and speed has the potential to be molded into a multi-talented weapon, especially one that complements the ability of Tyler Lockett. And if Metcalf can better his hands, just imagine the potential mismatch created by moving Metcalf face-to-face on the undersized the defensive back. And, of course, they have Russell Wilson throwing the ball, so that should be no issue of getting it to him accurately and timely. So here's the thing. I went back and looked at some of the better wide receivers that have come out in the last couple of years in the NFL and looked at their first-year splits at the wide receiver position from totals and to per-game averages. So according to Pro Football Reference, these are the stats for DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, DK Metcalf, and Michael Thomas. So these are who I'm comparing them to, as these are some of the better wide receivers that I've seen in the last couple years, in my opinion, that belong on this list. So here we are. DeAndre Hopkins he had 2 touchdowns, but he had 52 receptions for 802 yards, but he averaged 15 yards per reception at that moment in time. Calvin Johnson, 48 receptions for 756 yards, 4 touchdowns, 15.8 yards per reception. Julio Jones, 54 receptions for almost 1,000, 959 yards, 8 touchdowns, 17 yards per reception. Well, really 18. It was 17.8. Michael Thomas with a whopping 92 receptions, 1,137 yards, 9 touchdowns, 12 yards per reception. DK Metcalf, 58 receptions for 900 yards, 7 touchdowns, 15.5 yards per reception over the season. Per game, DeAndre Hopkins, 3.3 receptions for 50 yards. Per game, Calvin Johnson, 3.2, 50 yards. Julio had 4 receptions per game for 73 yards. And DK Metcalf Michael Thomas is 6.1 receptions per game for 75 yards. And DK's was 3.6 for 56 yards per game. Now, why am I reading this? Because this might be the trajectory that we might get to see. DK Metcalf is a really, really bigger guy. All these guys are really big, physical wide receivers. Some of them were really fast, so Julio is pretty speedy. DeAndre Hopkins can get down the field a bit. But I believe that DK Metcalf was a superior athletic talent. Maybe not as skilled, but athletically, he's probably a superior talent than them. And he was really raw, scouted coming out of the draft. But now they're seeing what he was able to do. And this was in a kind of limited role. So I believe that DK Metcalf really could shine with some more roles, some more routes, and be able to really do something. And this is, of course, a fantasy podcast, so we're talking about fantasy implications. DK Metcalf might be the sleeper in this year's draft. He might be the sleeper, the guy. And I think you could probably get him for relatively cheap in the 4th round, maybe the 5th round, because I don't think guys are really thinking about this potential right here. His stats are pretty nice and pretty lean and pretty forward looking when it comes to where guys with his sort of potential can land to. So if he continues to work on his game, be able to get better at controlling the football, being able to catch at a high level, like some of the names on here, because if I remember correctly, Julio Jones in the beginning of his career was not bringing in the most catches every single time. He wasn't as securely handed as he's gotten to be over his time on the Atlanta Falcons, but he developed the hands over time, and now he's one of the best wide receivers really ever. And I'm not saying that DJ Metcalf has the potential of being one of the best of all time. What I am saying is he may have a potential to be one of the better wide receivers in this league. At a young guy, you can get him for fairly cheap. If you're not in a dynasty league, if you're doing a draft-to-draft, year-to-year thing, he's going to be a steal this year. He's going to be really, really good, in my opinion, because I can only see him going but up if you put him in positions to succeed, which I think the Seahawks are going to do, because they had no idea that he was going to be as efficient, as good as he was last year. And as long as he stays healthy and he doesn't have any setbacks like that, I can't see why he would not trend upwards, especially with a quarterback who is still in the prime of his career, who can get him the football, who doesn't need a certain style of play to get down and go grab it and get out there. And when you have somebody like Tyler Lockett alongside him that can really take some pressure off a young wide receiver because of the top end speed of both of them, then you're really cooking with gas. And let's not forget that Hollister had a nice little start to his career last year. I can only see the Seahawks really, really becoming a nice fantasy bucket right now. So I would say if you're going to look to draft DK, look and see where the draft is trending first, because you don't want to just draft solely like chalk, because most times your draft isn't going to be chalk. You need to look at what is available and where to go. If you see that the draft starts to become very wide receiver heavy, don't panic, because I have a feeling that he is not going to be as tightly touted. But if you're in a really, really competitive league, and let's say the top 10 wide receivers are off the board at a time, you may need to start looking at a DK. You may need to start preparing mentally that you need to remember where he's going to be at, because at any moment in time, DK could slip. But if it starts to be a running back fest real early on and tight ends are going, it's more of a strong mixture of guys leaving the table, then you can save him in your back pocket and try and hold out until you have a fully fleshed team before then. So by fully fleshed, I mean you have at least a number one running back that you feel can be number one, and you have a guy at the wide receiver position that is a clear number one. Because DK, let me break this down. DK is not a number one wide receiver yet. He has the potential to be, but you're drafting him to be a sleeper number two that can boost up your team. All right. So with that said, we're going to take another break, and we're going to get into some quarterback prospect rankings coming from the top execs from the NFL.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
NFL execs have ranked the top quarterback prospects coming out in this draft 2020. And there have been a lot of different things going on. So the pre-draft process has only solidified that LSU's Joe Burrow is the top quarterback prospect of 2020 in the draft and the prohibitive favorite to be the Cincinnati Bengals' number 1 overall selection. And as part of this effort of ranking the league, or rankings for the league, this particular writer went back and forth so many times between Alabama's Tua Tagovailoa and Oregon's Justin Herbert that he decided to conduct the final poll this week of general managers and other high-level executives with a dozen teams. 7 predicted the number 2 pick will be Herbert. 5 predict that a nod to Tagovailoa, whose durability and long-term prognosis remain one of the great puzzle pieces in this draft, even as he makes what all by accounts are a strong recovery from significant hip injury. After Utah State's Jordan Love, there are also divergent opinions on who will be the 5th quarterback off the board between Washington's Jacob Eason, Oklahoma's Jalen Hurts, who maybe even Georgia's Jake Fromm. From there, the quarterback crop thins quickly. So, of course, ranked number 1 is Joe Burrow. Ranked number 2, Justin Herbert. So, the pre-draft process has been good for Herbert, who's a big guy, 6'6", 230, and has the arm to match. A lot of people like his tape, but they do think the talent is ahead of the nuance and polish of playing the position. An AFC executive said he's really good at throwing on the move. He can really push the ball downfield, and it's a clear pocket. And in a clear pocket with guys open, this guy is accurate. It was not a very complex passing offense at Oregon, but the kid is more than cerebral enough to pick up on that, and he has got good big-time arm. The concern is at the top of his drop, deciphering coverage. He just doesn't have a lot of experience doing that, so he's going to have to take some time, and I think he's got a really high ceiling. So, Herbert has the most experience of the top 3 quarterbacks. He played all 4 years, played in the Senior Bowl, and he completed 64% of his passes for 10,543 yards and 95 touchdowns, with 23 interceptions in 44 games and 42 starts, and returning for his senior season and leading the Ducks to the Rose Bowl. And he impressed during his Senior Bowl, where he was named the MVP, and teams started getting more comfortable with his personality, as that was also a concern, I remember. But several people have spoken to up to Herbert's lackluster supporting cast, especially compared to that of Joe Burrow and Tagovailoa. It's similar to the debate over Josh Allen a couple years ago, though Herbert's accuracy isn't much of a doubt. He can run. He has a huge arm, super smart. NFC scout said, and he's got a lot of stuff you can't teach, so a lot of intangibles. So that is why Justin Herbert is ranked 2nd, according to the NFL executives. And I would have to kindly disagree, because I'm more of a fan of Tagovailoa, because he really, really just was a winner to me. And honestly, if it was not for the injury, many scouts and coaches would regard Tagovailoa as a safer pick than Justin Herbert. And he's a really good prospect, a prospect that you can win pretty quickly with. NFC executives said he's really polished with the footwork and his fundamentals. I don't think you're going to see Herbert's ceiling for quite a bit. And for Tua, his floor and ceiling are pretty close. Tagovailoa came off the bench to lead the comeback over Georgia in the national championship game as a true freshman and finished his college career with remarkable numbers. 7,442 yards and 87 touchdowns with just 11 interceptions over 3 years while playing for 3 different offensive coordinators. He's got the moxie, an NFC quarterbacks coach said. He's got a short release for a left-hander. He's got quick hands. He's got great feet. He's athletic. He got something to himself, to him personality-wise, to him to compare it to Joe Burrow. Tagovailoa is a little more twitched up, an AFC scout said. He's got some traits about him that seem like they are high level: instincts, accuracy, quick release, and even some of his mobility. Durability is just a question here. When he scrambles and gets out, whoever has him is pretty going to be holding their breath. So he's 6 foot even, 217 pounds, and in just 2 years, Tagovailoa broke a bone in his throwing hand in spring in 2018 and broke it again and needed surgery, sprained his knee early in the 2018 season and suffered a left high ankle sprain and had a chiropic surgery in December. Had to fight that word. In 2018, returning 4 weeks later to start the college football playoff semifinal, suffered a high ankle sprain and had another surgery last October and suffered a high hip dislocation and posterior wall fracture November 18th, less than 5 months after he went season-ending surgery. Coaches and scouts were reviewed Tagovailoa's pro day session, and it was good. It went well. A lot of people liked him. And, of course, like Burrow, he played with an extremely talented supporting cast, including expected first-round picks Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs III. He does have some stuff where he works through his reads, and an AFC executive said, but it's so much ride number 22, Najee Harris, into the line, pop it out on the slant, pop it on the bubble. These cats are really good route runners and wide open. One Tagovailoa best suited to a one-back shotgun system. Think the Saints or the Dolphins under new coordinator Chan Gailey. I love him intangibly, another NFC coach said, but the way he plays, the way he takes his hits, the way he scrambles, it would worry me. So some guys are really not feeling it. So let's talk about Jordan Love real quick. So Jordan Love is the most polarizing quarterback in the class. Love could go top 15 or slide to day 2. All it takes is one team to fall in love with the tools and look past Love's disappointing junior year, in which he threw for a FBS high 17 interceptions on an overmatched Aggies team. If he sits for a year, he could be electric. This is the Mahomes thing coming at. Similar to the way some saw Patrick Mahomes coming out in a similar offense at Texas Tech. Those scouts mostly scoffed that comparison. There is not in the same stratosphere talent-wise. NFC scout said Mahomes' better arm, has better consistency produced in college. Everybody's making excuses for Love. At what point is it his fault? Interesting. And right now, I'm going to skip past Jacob Eason and talk about Jalen Hurts. And after an uneven Senior Bowl week, the Heisman Trophy runner-up threw the ball better than expected at the Combine and his pro day, backing up Hurts' insistence that he'll play quarterback at the next level. Some GMs and some offensive coordinators and head coaches will just hate a style and say the guy is not a quarterback, no different than what you saw with Lamar Jackson. And the AFC executive said, he's not as dynamic as Lamar was in college by any means, but if teams boil it down to what does this guy do well, this guy has one of the greatest college football seasons in history in a passing offense. He is a super clean kid, highly professional, really competitive, and I think someone will probably take Hurts on day 2. And the dude went 38-4 as a starter and played in a lot of big games. The LSU game, they ran into a freight train, but it looked like he was pressing. He's best when he just goes out and plays ball. He needs some development, there's no question, but he can really spin the football. Sometimes he gets uncoordinated with his lower half and his delivery, so it gets him in a little awkward. He just needs to clean up some of that stuff and to be more consistent. So this is probably the most interesting guy coming out of here, and some envision Hurts in the package role while he develops as a quarterback, more in the mold of the Saints Swift Army knife Taysom Hill. And I don't know what that means, but if the Saints could get him, that would be phenomenal to a lot of Saints fans. I would love to see Jalen Hurts on the Saints because he seems to be a guy that Sean Payton would like to really, really get creative with the offense. I would like to see what Sean Payton could be able to cook up as far as what the scheme is looking like. You never know what's coming, and the Saints are already so prolific with their scheme and placement. Of course, they do have a Hall of Fame level quarterback to be able to run some of the schemes that they have, but if Jalen Hurts can play at the NFL level, it would be electric. All right, so we're going to take another break here, and we're going to talk about Jared Goff and wrap this whole thing up and what exactly are contracts looking like in the NFL now.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
All right, so to wrap this up, we wanted to talk about Jared Goff potentially sitting down and restructuring his contract, and he is open to the idea of doing so. So Jared Goff was a big-time money man. Big money came in Jared Goff's hands, and he was not afraid to talk about it. A lot of people talked about it, really. They wondered if he could live up to this sort of contract, and to be honest, I don't think anybody could live up to the contract he got. From the moment he signed his extension last summer, it was the topic of conversation. It turned out his agent and the Rams have been discussing it to this offseason. So Los Angeles has endured a brutal free agency in which multiple players were jettisoned largely because of the lack of cap space. Goff acknowledged Wednesday that there has been internal discussion about his contract being restructured, while adding he is open to it. I think it's the better question for Kevin DeMoff and my agent, he says during the video conference call with reporters. I think there has been some stuff about being able to clear up some cap space, and if so, I'm all for it. I don't see why not. It doesn't change anything for him, and it helps the team out. It doesn't mean that the Rams franchise quarterback necessarily take any sort of pay cut. Jared Goff signed a 4 years and $134 million extension this September with $110 million guaranteed, the most in NFL history. The two-time Pro Bowler then proceeded to have the worst of his 3 full seasons. Reallocating some of that money might be a major help to his team. However, the Rams are technically over the cap, though they should fall slightly under this summer after cutting Todd Gurley with post-June 1st designation. Goff said that having an all-pro running back in Los Angeles doesn't put more pressure on him, or not having it. I'm just going to have to keep progressing and getting better, he says. So what I really want to talk about here is the fact that we have a trend in the NFL where guys get super big contracts and all of a sudden everybody's stressed out and saying, there's going to be no cap. How are we going to get guys? And then immediately after these contracts are signed, maybe a year or 2 years later on down the line, you start to see the word restructure come about. So restructuring contracts has been in my life for a long time because as a Saints fan, they definitely have done this to Drew Brees, to many different players over the years in order to magically regain some cap space, move money around in order to sign guys and make things viable year in to year out. They are cap magicians and are able to do things that I've never seen. Mickey Loomis is a cap magician. So manipulating the cap is not a new concept. Many NFL GMs and executives do this because they start converting money into bonuses, converting money into different ways. It's not like you're going to be making less money when deals get restructured. But what you're doing is they start paying you up front so that way things aren't backloaded when they need to make more room later on down the line, and so on and so forth, creating more cap space for them to go out and get free agents, go out and sign guys that have proven themselves worthy of having a new contract. It really, really helps teams really have more cap flexibility later down the line. So I see it more so as an investment in one's future capital. So you have, for one, it helps keep good players on your roster. Two, the fact that you already paid them already means that you're willing to keep them and make sure that they're taken care of. So, and that money just can't disappear. So unless you cut them, the money has to go somewhere. So pushing it up front, I think players like that, especially if they're good, they get the money up front. So that means they get to keep their lifestyle. They don't have to worry as much about upfront or backload costs and if things get restructured in a horrible way. And it helps bring more talent, especially for quarterbacks who are typically the safer variety. Now, running backs may be a different story, which is why they're in a different tax bracket when it comes to the NFL. But for quarterbacks, even wide receivers, restructuring isn't anything new and has been done time and time again to keep the ball rolling, to keep the Super Bowl windows open. And it makes me think about Patrick Mahomes' current situation and Deshaun Watson's current situation. As their contracts are coming up, they are going to be looking to get the masterful amounts of money, like money we've never seen in the NFL. They are going to get a boatload. But I would like to personally tell people, don't get too bent out of shape if you're a Chiefs fan or if you're a Texans fan about how much money they are going to be raking in. Because although you're going to see a lot of guaranteed dollars, you're going to see probably in the 150s, and it all really depends on what Dak does. But after what Dak signs, you know it's going to be more than what Dak signs. That's just it. So, however much Dak gets is going to try and add another $50 million on there. Regardless, they're going to make a lot of money, but don't stress out because 9 times out of 10, it's going to get restructured. Because no team can really survive once you pay the quarterback, at least competitively, from a standpoint of finding free agents or having a fully well-rounded team to get the job done. When Aaron Rodgers got paid, they did not have the best team around him. They still haven't had the best team around him really since the Super Bowl run. Drew Brees has been taking pay cuts year in and year out or doing team-friendly deals to get to where they are now. Tom Brady has been taking team-friendly deals basically his whole career in order to secure championship windows. Patrick Mahomes has already won his championship, so he can take a lot of different routes here in how he wants to handle his money and just team success. If he cares solely about the success of the team, I'm not saying he's going to take a team-friendly approach on this deal, but he is going to understand that this deal is probably going to be backloaded in the beginning, and then money will start pouring up front as years go on. And probably Deshaun would look at this and say the same thing. Deshaun has not won a championship yet, and he may be more concerned about getting his bag while his time is still here. And I can't be mad at either one of those assumptions. But we must always remain clear that eventually, once the quarterback gets paid, things start to get a little bit tighter. Positions are going to have to be handled. Things are going to have to be done. Look at Seattle. When they paid Russell Wilson, they could not pay every single great defensive player on the Legion of Boom. People had to go. People had to leave. That's just how it works. When the quarterback gets paid, the money gets tight. And when the money gets tight, you can either restructure or build through the draft. And by build through the draft, I mean you're going to have to not spend as much money as you would like to keep retooling a Super Bowl window. And you're going to have to wait it out for your next one. And that's basically the cycle. And then it keeps repeating itself because if the quarterback keeps getting better, the more money he'll have to make because that is the market That's what the market has made for quarterbacks in the NFL currently. And there's just no way that this is going to change any time really soon. But maybe one day when everything's fully guaranteed, we might see some changes. I don't know. But as for now, that will be the end of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening to said podcast. Thank you for rocking with us. Thank you for rocking with me. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast. 5 stars, 5 stars. Please give us a listen and tell us what you think, what you heard, man. Don't forget to follow our social media. We try to stay active out there on our Facebook, our Instagram, and our Twitters. Ask us some questions. Come talk with us. Come chat with us. Come engage. Thank you all for being here and staying true. Don't forget to stay safe out there. Wash your hands. Be well. Do good decisions. Stay home. Help flatten the curve. All that good stuff. And we'll be back next week with even more interesting fantasy topics, football topics, life topics, maybe even some cooking topics. I don't know. But this is the end of the show. Thank you all for listening. See you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.